DIEM, and this game was played down on board 127. Our man, Greeny 50,000, held about a 200 rating point advantage, mid 1700s over 1500s. And this game's unfortunately just no preparation by Black at all. Black, here, we'll see what happens. Here, White's playing the Queen's Gambit, and Black accepts. And here, Black just basically commits a beginner error. Black attempts to hold on to this pawn. It can't be done. I learned this when I was a teenager, that Black is not going to keep this pawn. White's just going to undermine that queen side of Black's. And you start with b4. Here it comes, b4, and I'm sorry, a4. And already, if Black takes this pawn, not only does the c4 pawn fall, the remaining Black pawns on the queen side are weak. Black has no development whatsoever. There's no need to try to grab a pawn and ride it out to the ending. Just develop your pieces, and Black has a very comfortable game. Okay, so Black's accepting this gambit, but he shouldn't be accepting it to win the pawn. And if you just look up in the databases or the books, you'll find that this is just a poor strategy. Anyway, it reinforces with c6, and now all of a sudden White has a winning game. Here we are at move 5, and White wins. And I actually even looked it up for the fun of it, and White's winning like 98% of the time here. I don't know why he doesn't win every time. Black's best move is to play knight c6 and just give up a piece rather than give up a rook. But here, let's see what happens. It's really a quick game. Now the queen gets out, and the queen gets out again. Black gains the tempo on the queen, but the queen has ways out. And here, have another pawn. While you're at it, let's take another pawn. And it looks like maybe Black's finally getting some development, but the price was it cost him an entire rook to do this. And now White has another strong move, utilizing the fact that this knight is pinned, it can't move. White's able to play rook a7 and pin another piece. And so Black's got these impressive pawns rolling on the queen side, but nothing to support it. And White just simply gets the bishop. He's a rook and a bishop ahead now, and no hope at all for Black. So what's the lesson here? Don't hang on to pawns, okay? Just develop your pieces. Knight f6, perfectly logical move, okay? And it's all in the books, it's all in the databases. This information is there, and it's free. Let's have a look at the next game between the two. And our guy's white, or black, so let me flip it down here, and we'll see what happens here. I was curious when I played over the other game first. I was wondering how much did this fella know about the opening. I was wondering what he would do. I said, well, if he plays a book opening for 10 moves, why couldn't he play a book opening for 10 moves in the other game? So I soon found the answer to my question on the very next move. White commits a blunder. Here it is. What kind of move would be a blunder here? Well, here it is, h3. I see this at the lower rating levels, 11, 1200, 1000. I see it a lot. I have students down at that level. I go over their games with them, and I see a lot of people that like to put their rook pawns up. Now, in descriptive notation, we call that pawn to rook 3, or pawn to king rook 3, or pawn to queen rook 3. And players do this because there's two reasons they don't like it. Knights and bishops going into these squares. Here I'm trying to color them in, and the interface is not cooperative. I'm pointing at them with my mouse. There it is. They don't like knights and bishops coming to those squares, and those are squares that can be painful if you're on the defensive side. They're finely colored in. If there's a knight on either one of those squares, there's potential forks on those squares. And if you have bishops on those squares, there's potential pins on those knights. So some people just they're uncomfortable with that. Maybe they lost the game due to incorrect play on their part, whatever the reason, they don't like them. So they push those pawns up and stop it. Now, what's interesting, what happens in the games with my students that are down in the 1,000, 1,200 level, what I tell them to do each and every time is to take the development advantage and run with it. Break the position open. Because if you do that, you'll get open lines for your pieces, and especially if your opponent's king is caught in the center, you can develop some incredible attacking chances against the enemy king. And what happens if they don't break the position open? Their opponent catches up in development, and then these rook pawn moves actually become strengths because they start limiting the mobility of my student's army, and they can't do anything. And I can't tell you the number of games before I could convince some of my students to break the position open that they would start getting the worst game and go rapidly downhill. It's just unfortunate. But H3, it might be okay if White's going to treat this King's Indian type setup where he castles queenside and is using this move in support of some kind of a kingside attack. But we'll see that's not going to be the case here. Okay, so right now White is not doing one thing he needs to do, getting his king to safety. But my first guess was, well, he's going to castle queenside. And it really looks like that's what he's going to do. Because he's cleared the path to castle queenside. And this is a perfectly logical path to take. Black hasn't done anything imposing himself. Black's only advanced 2 pawns, managed to develop 3 minor pieces, get castled, getting ready to counter in the center with e5. That would have been a perfectly logical plan for White to castle queenside and then try to attack on the king side. But instead, White commits another mistake. Here it is, d5. Now this is wrong for a lot of reasons. Number one, first thing it did was it opened up the diagonal for this bishop. Okay, now this bishop suddenly has all kinds of scope that it wouldn't have had otherwise. Number two, it cleared the c5 square for the black knight. Black didn't have access to that square before. Now he does. See, every time you move a pawn, and every time you move a pawn, you weaken at least 2 squares. Well, 1 square if it's a rook pawn. Often 2. And even on your first move of the game, if you push a center pawn, e4, you're weakening 4 squares. f3, f4, d3, and d4. They're all weaker than they once were. Now, that doesn't mean you're in trouble because you just weakened 4 squares. No, your position is solid enough to where those weaknesses don't mean a thing. But if you continue to weaken your position, some of those squares I'm just diagramming could become a problem later down the line. Okay? So the other problem with d5 is it didn't develop a piece. Okay? How are you going to win a game without your pieces in play? The answer is you're not. Okay? Unless your opponent places their queen where you can take it. Okay? And don't count on that. So now Black says, gee, outpost, I'm going to anchor it in. And now maybe White's a little reluctant to castle queenside. Oh my goodness, here comes a pawn storm. Well, you get one too. Just go ahead, weather the storm, castle, and start your pawn storm. Let Black prove he can win. So White's next move doesn't seem to make sense. Rook b1. What's he trying to do? Play b4? Well, maybe, but you need to get a3 in here along with it because this knight's coming to c5, and there it does. And now White commits another error, and we now proceed to see Black make about 3 or 4 errors in a row. Obviously, in my mind, this comes from moving too quickly. I don't know how quick they moved. This match started a week ago Sunday. It ended yesterday on Monday. Lasted 8 days. They played 34 moves here, so about 4 moves a day. But Black has a tactical win of a pawn here, and it's there for the next several moves. So I'll comment on it once. So let's look at it. Let's just take this pawn. Hello. Well, a lot of people wouldn't take that pawn because they see it's defended twice and only attacked twice. But fine. Suddenly black gets bishop f5, and doesn't matter where the white queen goes, that rook is falling on b1. Let's put it here for the fun of it. Now let's see, there's two exit squares. One is with tempo and f5. So, blacks just want to clear pawn. And this exists for the next several moves, but it wasn't, black missed it, okay? White kept allowing it, black kept missing it. Okay, so instead black played b6, and now white played a3. He's trying to get b4 in. It's still there, knight takes e4, but he doesn't do it. So now a5, a thematic move in order to keep the knight on c5. Now b4, you play pawn takes en passant, and white will never be able to get a pawn to b4. Now the way to do this, if you want to evict a knight from that square, it can be done, but white's doing it the wrong way. Aside from the fact that this tactic is still there, the proper way to do it in a normal position is to play b3 first, then a3, then b4. Yeah, it costs a tempo, but if you don't want that knight there, there's two ways to do it. The way I just illustrated, that's one. And the other one is not to play d4 and just hand him the square. That's the way to keep the knight out of c5, okay? So let's move on. a3, a4, and now this bishop has moved twice in the opening. White still hasn't castled. This bishop is still sitting at home. Black was never planning to put anything on g4, and well, the knight going there now, even if the pawn was back there, the knight going there now is kind of pointless. Looks like white's intending to just get rid of this pesky knight that he allowed there in the first place. Okay, so black continues his development. Knight d2. When's this bishop coming out? Hi. I need safety. Okay. So black starts undermining the white center. He just missed his last chance to grab on e4 before half a move back. Okay, there was three chances to take it. Let's just count them up. Let's see. So the first chance is right now. He doesn't take it. It's still there. It's still there. And now it's gone. Okay, so now, but black's doing okay here. Now white finally gets b4 in. But it kind of comes at a price now. White has traded off his dark squared bishop, and his light squared bishop really doesn't have any kind of scope and mobility whatsoever. White has an outside pass pawn, but doesn't really matter much. It's not threatening to advance. It's not even coming close to advancing. And, white's development is incomplete. Black is ready to blast the center open. And that's exactly what happens. And white commits a mistake. Now knight takes. You have to take with the c pawn because it's pinned. And now a new pin comes in, bishop a4, pinning the rook against the queen. So now white's winning material, or black's winning material. Bishop b5, and now pick up the piece, or the exchange. Save the rook, and it's all pretty routine. Now there's white's pride and joy, his pass pawn. He still hasn't castled. Okay, you got to get castled, and white just starts improving his position. And this would be a perfectly good time to castle, but instead white chooses to weaken his pawn structure even further. I'm trying to help you guys and explain the logic. What you're doing wrong. Why would you weaken your king side even further? You don't have a dark squared bishop to cover those squares. You're cutting the mobility of your own bishop down. It just doesn't make sense. This rook can come up to e5, and there's a natural queen h4 check coming in. In some positions, sacrifices can happen to allow that check to come in quicker, or more forcing. Okay, anyway, let's see what happens. Makes a pin the bishop. Now it's time to break the center open because the target is the king. The king is at the center of the game. And in effect, White is playing this, aside from being the exchange down, he's playing this a rook down because he's never gotten his rook into play. Might as well save the bishop. There goes that pawn. Watch out. Well, what else can White do? Really nothing. That pawn is not going anywhere. And now Black decides to make a sacrifice. Gives back the exchange, but he's getting something for it. He's getting an attack. And here's the problem that White brought on himself by not castling. His king is now on the run. Clearly, if the king steps to the f file, this queen is coming into play either on f6 or on h4. But it doesn't really matter. Black's has a crushing position here. So now Black stops and decides he's going to regain some material here. Forks the queen and knight. Leaves one choice to defend the knight this way, but here comes another fork. Whoops. Saves the queen. And now, who has the more dangerous passed pawn, White or Black? Well, I would say Black does. It's ready to promote in 2 moves. And the path is pretty clear. B2 is double covered and nothing is defending B1. Okay, so finally the rook gets into play, but too little too late. White uncorks, or Black starts uncorking some checks, and now the queen gets into play, and check here, and White doesn't want to step into a discovery. So he goes that way, but Black forces him to step into a discovery. And really, there's no hope here. If King B2, Rook, this check is pretty decisive. What's White gonna do? Give up the queen? White decided to resign. Anyway, just a few little Black had some good moves, found the right moves when he had to, but he missed some of the right moves when he could have gotten a clear advantage. And White committed two serious opening mistakes. Well, actually 3. Okay, H3 is the first one. D5 is the next one, and then Rook B1 was the last one. Third one. Actually, we could say 4. He should have castled here. Okay, that's what he should have done. And then the last mistake was E4, because we're still in the opening, and this just gifts a pawn to Black, but he didn't see it. All right, well, thanks so much for looking, and talk to you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye now.